The New York Islanders just dodged a major bullet. The search for the next general manager and president of the Islanders continues, and we now have word that their top candidate does not seem to be interested in the job. And typically, this would be really bad news, except the top candidate the Islanders had selected, or the ownership seemingly had selected, was really confusing. So perhaps this is a blessing in disguise for the New York Islanders. We're going to break it down on this episode of Islanders Digest, but before we do that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. This is going to be an absolutely crazy offseason for the Islanders. So much is happening. They're drafting first overall, picking a new GM. Plenty of trades are going to happen as that next GM puts their mark on this team. You're not going to want to miss out on all the updates, so be sure to subscribe for all of that on this channel. Now let's talk about this situation with the Islanders GM. It was pretty much confirmed yesterday that Ken Holland was the Islanders' top choice for GM, and a lot of fans on Twitter showed their displeasure with that update. Ken Holland, while a Hall of Fame GM, is an older figure and definitely not the type of GM Islander fans are looking for, as they hope this team really goes in both a younger direction and a more analytics-driven direction. We now have word from Arthur Staple, who is very reliable, works for The Athletic, that Ken Holland is believed to be not interested in the job for now. It says he's believed to be a no on the job, and it sounds like from other sources, as we're going to get into, it sounds like he has another position in mind with another team. And normally, it would not be encouraging to know that GMs, even though there aren't that many openings, aren't interested in your team. But in this case, Ken Holland would have been a terrible fit for the Islanders, in my opinion. I really hope he does not change his mind. As we talked about in our video, really focusing on Ken Holland, I do think he's done some great things in the past, even for the Oilers, and definitely for the Detroit Red Wings, winning 3 Stanley Cups, but it just wasn't a fit for what the Islanders need. And really, I don't know if he would have had the patience to truly build up the Islanders the right way. I really think he would have taken shortcuts, and the franchise would have been hurt as a result. And in addition, it really changes things. Now that there's a first overall pick involved, a ton of GMs are going to be interested in this position. So just because Ken Holland does not want it, it's not a big deal. Now Arthur Staple does have some other interesting points. And the second point is actually something that I am pretty disappointed in, and that is that Montreal is not letting Jeff Gordon go to the Islanders. He's not letting them speak with us to see if the Islanders are a good fit for him to be the GM. And this is disappointing because I actually think Jeff Gordon is a great great candidate to be the next GM of the New York Islanders. He's handled the pressure in Montreal while he is not in charge of everything over there. He makes a lot of decisions. And I also think what he did with the Rangers was not such a bad idea. In fact, I think a lot of the problems with the Rangers actually happened when they let go of Gordon and got Chris Drury. Gordon did a lot of good for that team, and I feel like he would have been the right GM to patiently handle the Islanders. And we don't know if this will change, but as of now, the Islanders are not going to get a chance to speak with him, and that is disappointing. So Arthur Staple speculates that Marc Bergevin is next in line for the New York Islanders. We don't know that, as it's not confirmed, but this is really seeming like this is going to be the most likely choice for the GM of the New York Islanders. And frankly, in our video talking about Bergevin, I was really hesitant. There were a lot of things about Bergevin that I did not love, but after hearing that Ken Holland was the top option, sign me up for Marc Bergevin. I hope he brings a really good team, assuming he is the hire. He definitely has the potential to be a good GM for the Islanders. Yes, he made some interesting moves with Montreal, but I also think there's a lot more pressure to win right away in Montreal. And he's one of those candidates where when you watch some of his interviews, he does show some capability to really learn from his mistakes in Montreal. He admits that not all his moves are the best. And in his time with the Kings, working with Rob Blake as a special advisor, he really had a chance to see what a more analytics-driven system and a more younger-oriented focused team is like. And I definitely think he learned from his time in the Kings. You got to remember, it wasn't just he was with Montreal. He did spend time with the Kings. And that's a team that's really going, while they also rushed their rebuild a little bit, that's more of a direction the Islanders want to go in, where they're getting younger players. Now, the mistake the Kings made is they really tried to rush their rebuild for guys like Kopitar and Doughty because they wanted to compete while they were still able to play hockey at the level they currently can. With the Islanders, that is less of an issue. Yes, the Islanders do have some older players, but they're not that much older. Like, for reference, Bo Horvat is only 30 years old. He's one of the older players on the team. Yes, we have some guys that are a little older, but in terms of the guys who are really core impact guys, they're not old enough where there's going to be any real rush if the Islanders want to take an extra year or a year and a half to really figure out this retool / rebuild. Because I do think, especially now they have the first overall pick, there should be a little more of an emphasis on a rebuild. And since they already have the first overall pick this year, that rebuild does not have to take a ton of time. You already have a ton of prospects, Callum Ritchie, Cole Eiserman, and that's why I think a GM like Bergevin can work, and it's why I would have loved to see Gordon, and I'm just glad that Ken Holland is not an option, at least at this moment. Again, as people are saying, this can change every 24 hours. Arthur Staple, Chris Bott, everyone's saying this is moving fast for the New York Islanders, and we will likely have another huge update tomorrow where everything is completely different, but that's how it looks right now. Now, they're also, speaking of Chris Bott, we also do have some notes from him, and I do want to talk about them. I do think when it comes to the sources, Chris Bott does have some sources within the Islanders. He seems to be a little ahead of some of these other reports, although I will say Arthur Staple is definitely more reliable when it comes to knowing everything is true. Some of Chris Botta's tweets, there's a mixture of some stuff that he wants to say and also actual news, so some of it's a little hard to digest between each other, but he does say that Gordon was a top choice for the Islanders, and we know he's not available. Ken Holland, he's speculating, may prefer Buffalo, and this is something I have heard before. He says that if Ken Holland would come to the Islanders, he would bring in Ryan Martin, who is currently the assistant GM of the New York Rangers. I actually think Ryan Martin would be a great person for the Islanders to bring in, regardless of who they hire. I know some people aren't going to like it because he's from the Rangers. He's done a lot of good work. He knows how the cap works really well. Definitely think he could be a good asset. But it doesn't seem like Ken Holland wants a job. And honestly, one thing I do want to emphasize, if this is the type of person that we're going to have to convince them to take this job, especially now that it's a first overall pick, then do we really want them to be the GM of the New York Islanders? I think we want someone who really wants to be here and who's passionate about this team, especially with all the assets this GM is going to have. Yes, this is a team that is going to need a lot of work, but this is a huge opportunity, and the Islanders definitely shouldn't need to convince a GM that they have to come over here. Like, they should want this job, and if they don't, well, then give it to somebody younger or someone more hungry who wants that job. Now, he tweets here that there's a mystery candidate at number 3, and I really don't know what this means. This could really mean anything. And at first, I was wondering if this mystery candidate was Jarmo Kekalainen. I think Kekalainen would be a really interesting fit for the New York Islanders, but he has him listed here at 6 as a backup choice. So what mystery candidate means, I'm not quite sure, especially since another X Factor candidate who I really want to get a look, Mathew Darche, is listed here at 5. It seems like they wouldn't want to give him both the titles of GM and president, which makes a lot of sense. It'd be Mathew Darche's first time as a GM. He's been the assistant GM in Tampa Bay for a long time, done a lot of good things, as we're going to talk about in the end of this video, because we haven't had a full video to really dedicate to Darche, and I think for many of you, he is the top choice to be the general manager of the New York Islanders. Doesn't seem like he's their top choice, although it is very likely that a person like Bergevin can come in and bring in a Darche, something like that. Or maybe a Ken Holland could decide he wants to only be president. Although at this point in time, it does seem like that president and GM role is going to be the same role. And that leaves us who is most likely at 4th on the list is Marc Bergevin. Like Marc Bergevin, I know we went up and down the list there, really talking about different candidates. Don't even want to talk about Chiarelli, so I'm going to pretend he's not on this list. But Bergevin, at this point in time, especially with Staple and Botta both mentioning him, does seem like the most likely candidate at the time. And at this point, for Islanders fans, I think this feels like a safe pick. I would prefer Darche, but Bergevin does feel safe, especially when we know that Ken Holland was another option. Again, I think that would have been an absolute disaster. The Islanders have definitely dodged a bullet here. And finally, we're going to talk about this tweet from Isles. This is Pierre LeBrun. They're talking about his article in The Athletic. We're not going to show the actual article because we don't want to get that taken down. That is a paid article. But one thing of note is Lamoriello is still in the fold with the Islanders. No, he's not the GM, but he is serving out the end of his contract. He's not talking to other teams. He's actually still around offering his advice and his wisdom to the Islanders. So that's definitely worth noting. I really wonder if Lamoriello would decide to take an advisor role with this new GM, and I do think there is some value to kind of keeping him around if he knows to step aside and can listen and provide value to as an advisor. I think that'd be really interesting. Also, of note, Patrick Waugh actually has 3 years left on his contract, not 2. This can definitely make things interesting when it comes to the Islanders moving on from Patrick Waugh. First of all, a 4-year contract is a long time for a coach that really did not have the longest time in Colorado. we'll see what happens. I don't think this changes much. I think if the new GM wants to bring in their next coach, they are going to be able to do that. But 3 years, that's a big difference from 2. That's definitely a lot more money the Islanders are going to have to owe both Patrick Roy and also have to pay another coach. And then finally, we're getting confirmation from another source that Darche is expected to be interviewed. And I really wonder if Darche has a good interview, if he skyrockets his way up this list. Really quickly, we're going to talk about some of Darche's accomplishments and why he'd be a great fit for the GM of the New York Islanders. He's the assistant GM of the Tampa Bay Lightning, has 2 Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's considered to be a capologist, someone who's really good at signing good contracts and also really good at evaluating talent to bring into the NHL. I mean, the Lightning have been really good at finding players and giving them great roles on the Lightning, increased roles where they are successful. Now, you do have to note with Darche, and I still think he's a top candidate. This is not me saying I don't think he's a good fit with the Islanders. There are some questions. Is he able to control handle a draft? Because that is a big concern with the Islanders. That is not as much of a concern as it is with the Lightning, who are a regular Stanley Cup contender. Yes, they did pick Howard, but how much of a decision did Darche have in that? And also, how much control has he had in the scouting system in general? Is that something he's good at? And more importantly, is he going to be able to do what he's done with the Lightning in New York? The tax situation is very different in Tampa Bay. They have a lot of advantages when it comes to taxes. So is he able to sign those same good contracts for players on the Islanders? And if the answer is yes, and his interview goes well, I think he'd be a great GM for the New York Islanders. That being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. Who do you want to be the next GM of the New York Islanders? What do you think of this update? Are you glad that Ken Holland is not getting the job like I am? I'd love to know your thoughts. As always, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. This is Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.